As President Trump has gotten a fast start on his pledge to deport millions of migrants, Governor Hochul has released guidelines for when New York State authorities can work with immigration enforcement. It includes a provision when an individual is suspected of an immigration crime. Immigration advocates see that as a confusing change in state policy. The Onondaga County Sheriff says he will not comply with ICE requests to detain undocumented immigrants. So, Chad, should state and local figures, or officials, I should say, cooperate with ICE in this in the deportations?
They should absolutely cooperate with federal law, including ICE, if that's what the law requires, but that doesn't mean that federal law is good policy. So I think effectively what we're talking about is a return to the Secure Communities program, which was resulted in 400,000 deportations between 2008 and 2014. It was a program where basically after arrest you send fingerprints to ICE and then they can start deportation proceedings. That's kind of a quick and easy way to deport illegal immigrants, which is something that the median voter absolutely voted for. But the unintended consequences of that policy are huge. They're very costly, and I don't think that's something that that median voter is really thinking about.
Well, what do you mean by the unintended consequence? What are those unintended consequences?
So, I mean, there's a lot of examples. One that comes to my mind is economists Easton Velasquez, they did this study where they found that basically when you deport immigrants, you increase the price of the services that they provide, which includes like cooking, cleaning, and childcare. And then as a result of that effect, American women with children, American mothers, they leave the labor market, stay at home more often, so it kind of ruins, it hurts their job market opportunities.
Luke?
Well, I wonder, is complying with federal law the same as enforcing federal law? So I agree that state and local governments have to comply with federal law, but it's the federal government's job to enforce that, and there's no requirement that state and localities do that. They're going to think more about what's in the interest of the people they serve in their states and their localities. And New York has sort of developed this criteria through Governor Hochul, where there's 4 different ways in which we would cooperate with federal law enforcement. Some of them are less controversial. If an undocumented person is convicted of a New York crime, that makes sense. I think that would be reasonable grounds. The other 3 deal with people suspected of crimes, and that gets a little dicey for me. If they were charged, I would be more comfortable with that because it had to go before a grand jury, but mere suspicion of the crime leads state and local authorities to turn these people over to ICE to be deported. That's problematic.
Yeah, less so in connection with what you had to say about if it's being suspected of crime versus, you know, being arrested and charged versus being convicted. But I agree with you. As it turns out, Chad, the state and local law enforcement are not obligated to assist ICE in carrying out its responsibilities, but as you noted, it would be a crime actually to obstruct, to try to prevent them from doing so. But New York's incentive for thinking carefully about doing more to help is that a sizable proportion of the New York population is either foreign-born or is actually first generation. And we've seen how vocal that part of the electorate is. But on the other side of things is, as you noted, public opinion is overwhelmingly, it's not just the median voter, but overwhelmingly in support of removals, deportations, whatever you want to call them. And in addition to that is the tremendous strain that is brought to local government, something that Mayor Eric Adams has publicized at length. And so now we have this new development as of yesterday, whereby the incoming, or actually the new Attorney General, Pam Bondi, has stated that she wants to see federal funds withheld for some sources that are very, very important to law enforcement, and that is the Burns Law Enforcement Fund, which constitutes the largest source of federal support. So do you want to go for public safety, or do you want to push for immigrant concerns?
So they're really amping up the pressure and leverage to get people to do the states to do what they want.
Oh, definitely. You know, the MTA has been told that they need to help identify and detain otherwise we could lose federal funds for transportation. So the Trump administration is really putting up the pressure. I wanted to go back to what Chad said earlier about not understanding all of the ramifications of this. Roughly 50% of farm workers are undocumented. Dairy farms in upstate New York are heavily dependent upon these. If indeed we have these raids and they are deported, who is going to work the farms? We're already seeing what avian flu is doing to the price of eggs. Now you take out workers, what's going to happen to the price of milk and other products here?
It's so true because, I mean, you know, the immigration system is not well designed for dairy. I mean, we have the H-2A visa, which is for temporary or seasonal agricultural work, which dairy isn't. And so, like, in a pre-Trump world, there was this almost policy of like benign neglect where ICE knew that the dairy farms had loads of illegal immigrants on them, but they turned a blind eye because people want cheap milk, they want cheap cheese, and so they wouldn't do the raids unless those immigrants...
Well, they've said that they're going to prioritize people who have committed crimes, right?
Yes, yeah, but what we have seen, and that's what they say, but we've seen them doing something quite different, including here in Syracuse, where a whole family was brought in under false pretense and then subjected to ankle monitors. I mean, can you just imagine that happening here in the U.S.? But I would say this, that New York and every other state has some cards that it can play, because historically 3/4 of removals happen only because of handoffs from local and state law enforcement. So they can condition that support upon these sorts of things, whether it's dairy farmers, whether it's really being true to the claim to focus on criminals or not. Because if they don't get the handoffs from state and local law enforcement, Trump's plan for deportation does not happen.
Well, but that gets back to the original question of you know, the should state and local officials be cooperating in
But
that?
what do you mean?
Well-
It comes down to the word cooperate. Again, if someone is stopped for a traffic violation, does that local government official have to send that information through to the feds, to
No.
ICE? Well,
No, they
that's...
don't.
But I'm also reminded of, like, you know, the number, 2/3 of Americans want to deport illegal immigrants. But then when you get into the details about, okay, how are you going to do it? And all the options that are laid out there, people hate, you know, like involving the military, for example, to find and deport people. So it's interesting. They want them deported, but how is a question that people don't have an answer for.
Yeah.